And we're back at the Paul Manafort trial in Alexandria, Virginia. And right now, closing arguments inside the courtroom are getting underway. The judge ordered both sides to keep their summations to less than 2 hours. The defense rested without calling any witnesses compared to the 27 witnesses which testified for the government, including key witness Rick Gates, Manafort's former right-hand man. The prosecution produced 367 exhibits compared to just 12 for the defense. Let's bring in our legal experts. Bob Bianchi is a criminal defense attorney and a former New Jersey prosecutor. And Jeff Jakubowicz is a white-collar criminal defense attorney who represented 3 White House employees during the Clinton scandals. Thanks to both of you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Good morning.
Jeff, good morning to you. Thanks for being here. Let me start with you and ask you where you think things stand. The defense has said we're not calling any witnesses. A lot of people were expecting that. So what are you expecting from these closing arguments?
Well, the defense will probably and most likely, and really it's their only way of doing it, argue that the government has not met their burden beyond a reasonable doubt. The government will argue it's a paper case. They will not distance themselves from Rick Gates, but they will say that we presented significant evidence showing that Manafort committed tax fraud, committed bank fraud, and it's all here in the paper.
And you're not surprised that they didn't call any witnesses?
You know, it's not clear what Manafort would have testified about. The evidence appeared to be overwhelming against him. It's also not clear if you're going to have 1 or 2 jurors who maybe will hang up the jury because they think this is an unfair prosecution. I think, based on my experience in that courthouse and in trying cases, that the jury will be back by Friday night.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a prediction. That's fast. Bob, let me get you to weigh in first. Do you share that assessment? You think the jury's going to be back by Friday night?
I think it's going to be a quick case, Kristen, but I don't think that what the defense did here was unusual, and here's the reason why. The government chose to put Rick Gates on, and that was a risky move. Look, as a prosecutor myself, working with cooperating witnesses, when you put them on, I use the analogy, when you sleep with a dog, you catch fleas. Or they're going to argue in summation, the government, birds of a feather flock together. But there was no need for the defense to put on a defendant who would have gotten hammered on cross-examination because of the email and documentary evidence and tax returns when they had an opportunity at their own witness, if you will, by cross-examining Gates. And they're going to make the whole case about Gates. They're going to say, and here's how I do it in summation, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, they called Gates for a reason, because the documentary evidence was not enough. And you're going to put my client, they won't say in jail, but you're going to convict my client based upon a fraudster, a philanderer, a person who's having affairs, a person who stole money. They didn't put him on for no reason, and that's the kind of person that they needed, and you should not believe him because he's not worthy of belief. I thought it was a risky move for them to put him on.
Go ahead.
But you see, in response to that, the government has a rebuttal because they have the burden of proof. And in the rebuttal, they will say Gates corroborates everything that's in the paper. We put Gates on so you can get a flavor of the evidence of what happened. And it is birds of a feather flock together, and these are the people that the president is hanging out with.
Well, we heard from Paul Manafort's defense attorney. Let me play that and then get everyone's reaction on the other side.
Mr. Manafort just rested his case, and he did so because he and his legal team believe that the government has not met its burden of proof. Thanks, everyone.
Now, they were actually asking for an acquittal. The judge disagreed, denied the motion for an acquittal. What can the defense do at this point in time to raise the specter of a reasonable doubt?
Well, you see, they have to ask for an acquittal. You're obligated to do, as a defense counsel, to do that at the close of the evidence. It's usually a routine procedure. Generally, judges deny it. And at this point, their only argument really is to attack Gates, to attack his credibility, to say he's a liar, and to say the government has not met their burden.
We also heard from Paul Manafort yesterday, albeit very briefly. Let's play a little bit of that clip. We don't have any more sound, but he did say, I have decided, Your Honor, do you wish to testify? No, sir. Bob, again, everyone thought that he ultimately wasn't going to testify. How do you make of what we saw from Paul Manafort during this case? Didn't hear a whole lot from him. No surprise there.
You know, something, Kristen, that I found was interesting is at one point in time, his attorney mischaracterized an evidence number of a piece of evidence in thousands and thousands of pages of documents, and in front of the jury, he corrected his own lawyer to give him the right exhibit number. Now, if you're a good trial lawyer and you've been around the block like I have, you know that the jury is watching every single thing that is going on, and I think that that would spell to them in a very subtle way that this is not a guy who just lets Gates do whatever he wants. He's a detail guy. He knows what he's doing. There seemed to be a lot of times where he was just sitting smugly at counsel table. I don't think that he made a great appearance that way. And even though he has a right not to testify, nevertheless, that jury is looking at him. Obviously, he chose not to testify because they had Gates, and that's the centerpiece of their case. And moreover, if he got on the stand, you got to remember, he's got another indictment he's facing, and he could have been subjecting himself to cross-examination. It could have gotten him even the deeper, hotter water. So he's really between a rock and a hard place, and I agree with the guest that it would be, in my opinion, a very quick return of a guilty verdict on most counts.
Well, I'll tell you who's watching all of this very closely, the president and the White House. And guess what? He's up and tweeting today. Let me read that for you both. The rigged Russian witch hunt goes on and on as the originators and founders of this scam continue to be fired and demoted for their corrupt and illegal activity. All credibility is gone from this terrible hoax, and much more will be lost as it proceeds. No collusion. He then goes on to reference Peter Strzok, who was, of course, fired yesterday from the FBI, calling it a decisive step in the right direction. So, Jeff, let me just give the final comment to you. Obviously, the jury not paying attention to those tweets, or at least not supposed to be.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. But what does it mean that the president is tweeting, calling this all a rigged witch hunt, while this very serious case is moving forward?
Well, you know, that's an interesting point, because if, in fact, the jury is paying attention to what the president is tweeting, then you have a situation where the president is ultimately influencing what the jury verdict would be. And if I'm Mueller, I would look at that and say, is this another act towards obstruction? Because the president should not be influencing what the jury should do.
Thank you for checking out our YouTube channel. Why don't you subscribe? It's really easy. Just click on that button down there. And for more news from MSNBC, click on any of these videos here for the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more videos from MSNBC with our newsletters. Head over to msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up.